Batman and Mr. Freeze SubZero was the last time we saw the original animated series model style utilized in any movie or show. It was meant as a closing chapter for the brilliant arc of Victor Freeze in this continuity. Due to a kind of confusing progression of events, it ended up not finishing Freeze's story. He would make 2 more appearances on screen for the DCAU. As the official follow-up to the legendary Batman Mask of the Phantasm, how did SubZero compare, both as a sequel and as its own thing? Victor Freeze lives a relatively peaceful life up in the Arctic with his 2 polar bears, Nachta and Shaka, and an orphan Inuit boy named Kunak. His wife's body and her stasis chamber survived the events of Season 2's Deep Freeze, as he continues to care for her within his makeshift living space. This quaint existence he's rebuilt for himself is shattered by the unintentionally devastating arrival of a military research submarine that burst through the bottom of Freeze's cave, burying him in ice and breaking Nora's glass tube. This results in her disease accelerating, and once again, her life is in immediate danger. After swiftly taking revenge on the sub's crew, Freeze travels back to Gotham and kidnaps his old cryogenics partner, Dr. Gregory Belson. The doctor is at first reluctant to help, but changes his tune when Freeze offers him a large vein's worth of gold to save Nora. It turns out, Mrs. Freeze needs an organ transplant to survive, but she has a rare blood type, so finding a matching donor won't be easy. After searching through Gotham General Hospital's files, they find that Barbara Gordon has the blood type required. Freeze crashes a local nightclub and abducts Gordon while she's out on a date with Dick Grayson. Grayson fails to rescue her, thus Batman and Robin strike out into the city in order to find Barbara and foil Freeze's latest plot. In my reviews of Holiday Nights and Cold Comfort, I already covered a lot of background on the creation of SubZero, but just to give you a refresher, in 1996, Warner Bros. Commissioned the team behind BTAS with a direct-to-video animated feature as a marketing tie-in to the following year's Batman and Robin theatrical release. They requested Batman, Robin, and Batgirl to go up against a villain from the impending Joel Schumacher film. A story featuring Bane was turned down, so Mr. Freeze was inserted as the antagonist. Originally titled The Iceman Cometh, regular contributors Boyd Kirkland and Randy Rogel were put in charge of the project, and off they went to make it a reality. Meanwhile, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Alan Burnett were busy on Superman the Animated Series, having little to no involvement. This disconnect would cause a bit of a continuity discrepancy. While the feature was ready to be released on time in 1997, Warner Bros. Decided to push it back to St. Patrick's Day 1998. It debuted to critical and commercial prosperity, but by the time it finally came out, the new Batman Adventures was in full swing, and Mr. Freeze had already made an appearance. Cold Comfort followed the events of SubZero, which means we already saw where Freeze would end up, and spoilers about the movie months earlier. Bruce Timm also wanted to adapt Paul Dini and Glenn Murakami's White Christmas from the Batman Adventures comic series as part of TNBA's Holiday Nights anthology episode. In Dini's story, Nora is dead. This obviously conflicts with the ending of SubZero, and the inclusion of the segment had to be scrapped. Timm had said he considered Mrs. Freeze deceased and wouldn't have brought her back if he were in Kirkland and Rogel's shoes. I really loved where Freeze ended up in the Batman Beyond episode Meltdown, but I would not have minded one bit if this film was the last time we saw him. It's a fitting end to the character's story, even if it isn't my favorite use of Victor the entire runtime. According to an April 1998 interview with director, co-writer, and co-producer Boyd Kirkland, the production team was told to make SubZero simpler, lighter, and more kid-friendly than Mask of the Phantasm. The aim of this strategy was to make it easier to cross-promote with the, kid-friendly Batman and Robin film. It's definitely not as deep as the Phantasm movie, but it wasn't trying to be. At 66 minutes, SubZero comes off more like a 3-part installment of the TV show, which, is fine. It's well made and a solid watch, but if you regard it as a true sequel to the 1993 film, it's hard to not consider it a bit of a letdown. Making something less complex was by design from Warner, though, so I don't know if it's fair to really use its simplicity as a mark against it. The late Mary Kay Bergman voiced Barbara/Batgirl here, and she did a fine job.
I know who he is. Everyone in Gotham knows you. And I know who that is, too. I thought your wife was dead.
Bergman replaced the animated series actress Melissa Gilbert. Gilbert had a more recognizable tone but was supposedly busy with other work at the time of recording. When production on the new Batman adventures came around, a younger-sounding voice was needed, which landed Tara Strong the role. George Zunza played Gregory Belson and sounds pretty much how you think a character who looks like that would sound.
I said I'd help, but this is going to cost you more than a little gold nugget. I mean, the risks involved.
Zunza was more well known in the DCAU for providing the voices of Scarface, the ventriloquist, and Perry White from Superman the Animated Series. I understand the limitations they were under, but I really think this character needed to be fleshed out more. If he has all that history with Victor, they really could have played into that and given him more depth. As is, he's just a greedy doctor in significant financial debt. Kevin Conroy, Lauren Lester, Michael Ansara, Bob Hastings, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., and the rest of the cast all do well, but aside from maybe Ansara, there are no standout emotional moments. Kunak and the Polar Bears are equal parts funny and humanizing for Freeze. Ansara's delivery when calling the young boy is at least humorous.
Kunak, get out of here.
Mary Lou Henner pops in for a scene as Veronica Vreeland. Bruce's wealthy friend was in 6 episodes total between the 2 Batman shows, but this is the only time she had blonde hair instead of her usual red. I'm not sure if this was a mistake or what, but it's a noticeable little eccentricity. Koko and Dong Yang provided the animation services. This one varies pretty widely between mediocre and striking. I'm mostly talking about the Climax, which I think they clearly spent the most time on. It's excellent looking work that you should go out of your way to see, but the biggest aspect of the visuals that sets SubZero apart is the use of CGI by Foundation Imaging. There are more portions of this movie done in this style than I remember. Of course, it's mixed in with the traditional animation for varying results. Sometimes I think it looks great and is pretty seamless, giving the movie a unique look. Other times, the technology wasn't quite there yet. They used the CGI right away for an intro with the Bat logo that's frozen over to create the movie's title screen. It's purposely reminiscent of Tim Burton's first Batman movie in more ways than one. Yeah, they used Danny Elfman's Batman theme there. It was kind of odd hearing it here, especially since this whole movie was made to co-promote the latest Schumacher film, and those had an entirely different theme from composer Elliot Goldenthal. I love the Elfman music, but Shirley Walker's cue from the show would have been less jarring. Michael McCuistion is credited with the rest of the movie's music, and the Elfman comparisons don't stop with the intro. There's a very Edward Scissorhands sounding bit for Nora that caught my ear. Something similar pops up during the credits, too. I'm not sure if this was purposely done, but I wouldn't be surprised if these were tributes to Elfman's work, considering his ties to Batman. A retro soundtrack also created a nice vibe for the scenes with Grayson and Barbara growing closer as a couple. This was the first time we saw them in a romantic situation, and it's a little sad to think how they didn't work out in this continuity. Speaking of that retro soundtrack,
Am I blue? Ain't these tears in my eyes telling you?
Am I blue? Ain't these tears in my eyes telling you?
someone in production really liked that song. While there's very little Batgirl in this movie, Barbara does get a lot of screen time. You can argue she's playing the damsel in distress, but I love how hard she fights back against her captors, almost breaking free of their clutches on several instances. The first time she escapes to the upper level of the oil rig, and we get that big reveal shot, it caps off a strong overall sequence. Through a conversation recorded with Dr. Belson's stockbroker, the dynamic duo deduced Mr. Freeze is holding Barbara on an abandoned oil derrick 5 miles off Gotham's coast. They rush the Batwing there to discover Barbara running for her life as Freeze and Belson attempt to force her into a transplant procedure that would save Nora and kill her. Batman and Robin intervene, but soon, Belson accidentally sets off an oil fire when shooting at Gordon. Not long after, the entire structure is up in flames. Belson attempts to escape, but is crushed to death by the rig's damaged helipad. Freeze is left with a broken leg after debris falls on him, but he insists Batman, Robin, and Barbara save Nora and Kunak on the lower level. They're successful in loading the Batwing and escaping before a massive explosion, but Freeze falls hundreds of feet into the water below after Batman is hit with a piece of falling metal when attempting to save him. 2 weeks later, we see a news report that Nora has been cured of her disease thanks to the research of her husband and the resources of the Wayne Tech Corporation. Victor is shown alive, watching the news from outside a cabin window. He sheds tears of happiness for his wife and hobbles away with Nachka and Shaka into the snow-covered, frozen tundra. One of the things I really enjoy about this movie is all the detective work Batman and Robin do to find where Freeze is keeping Barbara. There are several steps they have to go through, and they're quite well written. It's always fun seeing the dynamic duo logically investigate and use their sleuth skills.
There's an abandoned oil derrick out there.
Something about Kevin Conroy's line delivery there has always stuck with me. I don't really know why, but it's been in my head for years. As I said earlier, the climax looks great, but is high quality all around. Taking into consideration the setting, the ticking time bomb of the fire, and the innocence to save within, it's a thrilling finale to experience. By far and away, the best content in the film.
Shoot me a line!
By the way, during the climax, it's interesting how Babs yells for a line like she's kind of hip to Batman and Robin's lingo. At this point, she didn't know their identities and vice versa, but maybe this clued Bruce in if he didn't already realize who was under Batgirl's mask. There was originally a different ending where both Freeze and Nora are cured of their conditions and emotionally reunite, only for Victor to be hauled off to prison for the rest of his life. It was meant as a bittersweet finish, and I could have seen that working. However, Warner shot it down, and it was replaced by the Doctor's silent, tearful sacrifice, seemingly going off the grid for good as Nora alone is at last cured. I do think this would have landed as a finale for the characters if they decided not to bring Freeze back. Ultimately, the movie is solid. It's got that stamp of quality most DCAU Batman products have, but it's not really in the same conversation as Mr. Freeze's first 2 appearances in the series or the artistic success of Mask of the Phantasm. Its legacy is a positive one, just not the most indelible among its peers. With SubZero finally hitting the home video market in 1998, plans were already in motion for the next animated Batman project. Boyd Kirkland again led production on a new story called Batman Arkham, which he was going to write and direct. Despite the casting process already being underway and character designs created, the project was dropped in favor of the Batman Beyond movie, Return of the Joker. Kirkland was interviewed about the situation in a 1999 edition of Batman the Animated Newsletter e-zine. Quote, "The basic storyline of our recently canned animated Batman movie involved the Joker and Bane, both prisoners in Arkham, who team up to escape and seek revenge on Batman. Bruce Wayne is involved in a heavy romance before this happens, and is seriously considering retiring the cape and cowl to get married when he's attacked. Robin is seriously injured, but plays an important role in helping Batman before the story is over. The story was full of non-stop action and eye-popping visuals, as well as had a lot of heart and romance. I had one of the best studios in Japan lined up to animate it, with a bigger budget than I had for SubZero. It would have been great. Needless to say, I'm extremely disappointed that it won't be made." End quote. While it's unfortunate Batman Arkham never saw the light of day, Return of the Joker did turn out to be quite the fondly remembered production, and it just so happens to be next up on Batmay.